Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. The independent body that oversees intelligence in this country is raising serious concerns, worried about security threats and how they are communicated to the Prime Minister. In reviewing CSIS reports from 2018 to 2023, the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency says there is consensus Canada was a target of foreign interference and the People's Republic of China a major perpetrator. But reports of individual threats did not always make it to the Prime Minister's desk, and that's because there was disagreement between CSIS and the Prime Minister's National Security and Intelligence Advisor about how serious individual threats were. The watchdog agency is now making recommendations, and here is what we heard today from the Public Safety Minister in response.
The Prime Minister directed a year and a half ago that there be a broader sharing of intelligence information with ministers responsible, and I have noticed myself the extent to which different pieces of intelligence are tracked in terms of who saw what when. So those improvements have been largely in place for some time, but we're certainly happy to look at the report, obviously, in detail and ensure that the recommendations are enacted.
Well, to talk about this report, we're now joined by security analyst Christian Leuprecht. He's also a professor at both the Royal Military College and Queen's University and the author of Intelligence as Democratic Statecraft, published by Oxford University Press. Christian, always good to see you. Thank you for being with us.
Michael, my pleasure. Hello.
Hello. Listen, I want to begin our discussion here by reminding people what we heard from Justice Og, because in her interim report on foreign interference, she wrote that she had not seen any evidence to suggest Canadian officials were acting in bad faith, but what she had seen suggested information did not get to where it was intended and or not properly understood. Add to that now this report from the intelligence watchdog, and it seems to back up, if not give us details about what Justice Hogue was trying to get at. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, so these are clearly issues of information flows, and we know that these are pervasive, but we know that given the rapidly changing threat environment, other democracies have taken very proactive measures to improve precisely those flows, to make sure that the right people have the right information at the right time. Australia and the United Kingdom deliberately restructured their intelligence flows at the senior levels. Canada, of course, has not. And so we see here precisely those significant, very high transaction costs, and that the right information did not get to the right people at the right time. And so these are issues that ultimately you're not going to solve by legislation. These are issues you're going to solve by paying attention to your bureaucracy and posturing your bureaucracy more effectively. One of the key takeaways is that security and intelligence just doesn't get a lot of bandwidth when it comes to probably the Prime Minister's office, because otherwise, if it had been a priority, people would have noticed much earlier that they're not getting the information that they wanted, or they weren't getting it in the right time or in the right format. At the same time, of course, look, ultimately, the responsibility lies with the government of the day. We live in a Westminster system of government under ministerial responsibility. So there's ultimately the minister of the day when it comes to CSIS, the public safety minister, and when it comes to the Privy Council office, the Prime Minister, who's responsible for what's happening within their departments. And so in this particular case, we can simply say clearly this was, again, not a priority for the Prime Minister or the Minister that were responsible for that bureaucracy. But of course, it's not unusual that we have discrepancies between what intelligence agencies in democracy think is important and what the government of the day says is important. We live in a democracy, and so it's ultimately up to the government of the day to judge what intelligence matters to them, whether they're going to action it, and when they're going to action it. Mm-hmm. And so the government ultimately needs to answer for that.
Well, the report does recommend that everyone come up with a common working understanding of what political foreign interference is, because whether or not this was prioritized, as you say, the report points to this disconnect between what CSIS considered was of note and what the National Security Advisor, Intelligence Advisor had to say about it. How easy would it be to come up with some type of common definition so that they could trigger to know, yes, this is of concern?
Well, our understanding and definition of national security in this country dates back to the CSIS Act of 1984, 40 years ago, when we were still in the Cold War. And so, again, this points to the fact that we have national security frameworks, definitions, concepts that are wholly outdated, that no government has felt it necessary to update. And as you point out, it's difficult to get agencies on the same page when we don't have a common definition of foreign interference, we don't have a common understanding, and so necessarily we shouldn't be surprised that not only different departments and agencies interpret it differently, but that also the bureaucracy and the government of the day interpret it differently.
Mm-hmm. Well, and add to that the challenge of sharing the information, because it was also noted here that CSIS struggled to report their concerns because they were worried that they'd be interfering in the election process. What type of challenges that create for any agency then?
Well, CSIS provides its best capability of an intelligence. CSIS provides its best sort of ability to provide the intelligence of the day, but ultimately it is not CSIS's job to provide policy recommendations. So we have an intelligence assessment, and it is up then to the Privy Council office and the Prime Minister to see what it is that they ultimately want to do with that assessment. It appears that there are serious translation issues, shall we say, between what CSIS is trying to communicate, how that is being appreciated within its own bureaucracy, and then how that is being fed up and translated to both political staffers as well as the government of the day. And so again, it suggests on the one hand, perhaps unfamiliarity with the security and intelligence community, how that community needs to operate itself and communicate with itself, and how it needs to communicate with its political masters. And again, that points to the fact that security and intelligence just hasn't been a particularly high priority, because otherwise we would have discovered these issues much earlier and try to lower some of the collective action issues that we're now discovering.
Mm-hmm. Well, you say fast track there, or prioritizing there, and the federal government has introduced Bill C-70 to deal with foreign interference. And today we heard from the Conservatives, they are proposing to fast track Bill C-70 through the House. They want to see this foreign interference legislation pass before the next vote. What do you make of that proposal on behalf of the Conservatives?
So inherently, it's in the interest of our democracy to see these measures postured more robustly. These are changes that the government itself introduced after consultation, both internal and external. And I think the opposition is throwing down the gauntlet for the government to see, is the government actually serious about passing legislation it has introduced, or is this simply performative posturing by the government? So I think it'll be very interesting how the government responds to that, and also, of course, how the other parties in Parliament will respond to that. It's one thing, as we know, to have a bill that everybody can agree on in principle. It's very different to have wording in that bill that everybody can ultimately agree on.
Well, we certainly are watching here in Ottawa. But Christian, I always appreciate the time. As always, thank you for that.
Thank you, Michael.